guys, my name is Clever PC. So guys, in this video let's talk about MCQs, which is multiple choice questions with regard to the listening module. You guys are saying that these are the hardest section when it comes to listening and really gives you hard time. Yes, I really truly understand that, but these things require strategies. So let's really mention while I'm taking you through, and at the end I'll give you a sample test where you will use the strategy which I was using.
Part 3.
You will hear a tutor discussing with two students their research for a paper in cyber psychology. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
I'm very glad that the two of you decided to pursue this research topic, because I think it's not only much needed, but very relevant to current psychological concerns about addiction issues in young people. Now, tell me, how did you get started?
Well, we looked around for problems, or perceived problems, that teenagers in general might encounter, and we came up with the extremely popular phenomenon of instant messaging and the implications that the use or overuse of this form of communication might have on teen behaviour.
Then we decided to propose the concept of instant messaging addiction. By the way, do you mind if we abbreviate instant messaging to IM in our discussion? Not at all. But before you go any further, tell me something about the demographic sample you used.
We chose a random sample of teenagers from Jiangsu province from a typical public middle school, and we considered this group to be representative of teenagers in urban China. We distributed 500 questionnaires and 450 were returned. The sample group was on average aged between 14 and 15 years.
Internet addiction, or technological addiction as it's sometimes called, has been studied many times before. What makes your research different?
Well, previous studies indicated that internet-dependent students are more likely to use instant communication, but we wanted to find out primarily whether IM addiction actually exists, and if so, what the symptoms are.
And secondly, we wanted to know whether IM addiction could be predicted. And finally, whether addiction has an impact on academic performance. Quite a large undertaking. Tell me, what IM addiction symptoms did you identify among teenagers in your sample? We found 4 major IM addiction symptoms, which are remarkably similar to the symptoms used to identify substance dependence. Although here we're looking at behavioural addiction, not chemical addiction to drugs, alcohol, or the like.
Yes, loss of control was a significant factor, which indicates that the addicts had less self-discipline. They could not control the amount of time they spent on IM, and they neglected their schoolwork, as well as other responsibilities or obligations they might have. Obviously, academic performance was adversely affected.
I'm sure that led to a lot of complaints from family and friends, not to mention teachers. Yes, of course. Another symptom was, as you would expect, a preoccupation with instant messaging. They would be annoyed if interrupted when chatting online, and they would feel depressed and moody when they couldn't. They would go without sleep in order to chat, and when they were offline, they would still be thinking about online chatting. As in chemical addiction, they would need to increase the dose, in this case of IM time to get satisfaction. That sounds quite disturbing.
Yes, and as you can imagine, loss of relationships due to overuse of IM was a factor too. The addicted teenagers would rather chat online than go out with friends or spend time with family, which jeopardized their social relationships and their educational opportunities.
The fourth addictive factor we found was escape. These teenagers used IM as a form of escape from reality and responsibilities.
Before you hear the rest of the
So here we have which two scopes of the research are mentioned in the talk, and then the other question we have which three following symptoms correctly describe IM addiction. So in this part, you only first read the questions. Don't go ahead with the options. No, first read the questions and then you underline the keywords. Here we have two scopes of the research. So these are the keywords. This is what you're going to look for when the audio starts playing. So and then here we have which three following symptoms correctly describes IM addiction. So the keyword is symptoms, and then of course the number 3, and then we should describe IM addiction. So here you first start by getting the questions only. Don't go ahead with the options because they will confuse you. Yes, so let's go ahead.
You will hear a tutor discussing with two students their research for a paper in cyber psychology. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25.
Alright, colleagues, it's imperative to first listen to the instructions. Here they said a tutor is going to talk to two students about a research cyber psychology. Note the number of people who are going to speak, tutor and two students, and note their voices, as well as the questions they said from 21 to 25. Yes, you have to mark these two and write them down so that you do not get lost on where the audio is moving to. Yes, so let's go ahead.
I'm very glad that the two of you decided to pursue this research topic, because I think it's not only much needed, but very relevant to current psychological concerns about addiction issues in young people. Now, tell me, how did you get started?
So first off, the tutor did start by saying he's very excited that this research was relevant and much needed. So here the tutor first presents the whole topic. So while you are listening to how the tutor is speaking, try to note your keywords that you stated. Remember, we are looking for scopes of the research. So usually you have to really note these voices so that you really didn't get confused. So next, I guess we are going to hear the students talk.
Well, we looked around for problems, or perceived problems, that teenagers in general might encounter, and we came up with the extremely popular phenomenon of instant messaging and the implications that the use or overuse of this form of communication might have on teen behavior.
So here the first student started off when James, I think it was James, said problems teenagers face, especially with instant messaging. It's overuse and use which affects teen behavior. So do we have any of these options right here? Let's go ahead with the audio. And as you're hearing this audio, please try to make some notes here and there. You might have to refer to these notes in the final 10 minutes of the listening test.
Then we decided to propose the concept of instant messaging addiction. By the way, do you mind if we abbreviate instant messaging to IM in our discussion?
So now it was the turn for the other student, the lady. Usually they'll give you a guy and then a lady. So then the lady said, we want to introduce the concept of instant messaging addiction. And then she requested the tutor if they could abbreviate instant messaging as IM. And when we look through the options, we have IM. So good enough in writing your side notes right. So you have to really compare them at the very end under those 10 minutes that they will give you. So let's go ahead.
Not at all. But before you go any further, tell me something about the demographic sample you used.
So here the tutor went ahead and said not at all, that means it's fine. So and then she requested them to first give her the demographic sample that they used. You see how the questions are trying to flow, which might correlate to the scope of the research, and this is when your ears have to be tuned on so well. Let's go ahead.
We chose a random sample of teenagers from Jiangsu province from a typical public middle school, and we considered this group to be representative of teenagers in urban China. We distributed 500 questionnaires and 450 were returned. The sample group was on average aged between 14 and 15 years.
So here the most students said that they chose a random sample of teenagers of middle school, and then they distributed 500 questionnaires and then 450 returned. This was just like a start. So let's go ahead. We are looking for scope of the research.
Internet addiction, or technological addiction as it's sometimes called, has been studied many times before. What makes your research different?
So the tutor went ahead and said, in addition, your research has already been studied. What makes yours different? Yes, let's go ahead and listen.
Well, previous studies indicated that internet-dependent students are more likely to use instant communication, but we wanted to find out primarily whether IM addiction actually exists, and if so, what the symptoms are.
So here the most students said that previous studies show that internet students used instant communication, and they wanted to find out primarily if instant messaging addiction actually exists. So and also he went ahead and said, if so, if what the symptoms are. So when we look through our options here we have A has IM addiction presence, which might be there. Let's first consider that. We also have types of symptoms. Yes, types of symptoms. So let's go ahead and keep listening to the audio. If you've not yet seen these answers, just keep writing them down, because this was when the tutor was really asking for the scope of these students' research.
And secondly, we wanted to know whether IM addiction could be predicted. And finally, whether addiction has an impact on academic performance.
Alright, now it was the lady's turn. She said, secondly, meaning some point has already been mentioned. So if you've been really making small notes, it will definitely be easy for you to find that point. But of course, you have to keep on moving. So here, the lady said, if IM addiction has been predicted, which is one of the option, and that's really option E. And also, she also said, lastly, if IM addiction has an impact on academic performance. If we really look through these options here that are trying to confuse us, we have D as relationship between schoolwork and symptoms. And then here we have symptoms can be predicted. Both these answers are wrong, and they were wrongly interchanged. Remember, we had the relationship between schoolwork and IM addiction, not symptoms. And C was wrong because it was IM addiction that was being predicted. So you will definitely cancel this out very fast. So let's go ahead with the last part of this audio.
Quite a large undertaking. Tell me, what IM addiction symptoms did you identify among teenagers in your sample?
So next was the tutor. You see how you have to cram these voices. Now the tutor said, that was quite a lot. And then she said, what symptoms did you identify? You see how they are just shifting to question 23 to 25. So if you had followed the instructions, you would have paused, of course, and then followed those instructions. Here they say which three following symptoms correctly describe IM addiction. So this one, the tutor said, which of the symptoms did you identify? So that means they've already moved away from question 21 to 22, and now they are at question 23 to 25. So now let's keep moving. You have to follow and be very attentive.
We found 4 major IM addiction symptoms, which are remarkably similar to the symptoms used to identify substance dependence. Although here we're looking at behavioural addiction, not chemical addiction to drugs, alcohol, or the like.
So here the first student said there are 4 major symptoms. That's like good discourse marker. She said which are similar to substance dependence. Then she said they are behavior addiction and not chemical addiction like drugs. So in here you're very ready to listen to 4 symptoms. One of them might not be there. So now let's go ahead.
Yes, loss of control was a significant factor, which indicates that the addicts had less self-discipline. They could not control the amount of time they spent on IM, and they neglected their schoolwork, as well as other responsibilities or obligations they might have.
So here the gentleman said the loss of control was a significant factor, meaning it's one point. Write it down if you want. If it's being paraphrased around, there are options. And also he went ahead and explained and said they could not control their significant performance. That was more of an explanation on the same point. And then he said, as well as other losing discipline of other obligations that they might have. So you have to really pay attention to these discourse markers as well as meanings like another point. So just simply make these notes if you don't find these words there, and then because remember in the options they are paraphrased. That's why you guys find hard time with MCQs. So let's go ahead.
Obviously, academic performance was adversely affected.
I'm sure that led to a lot of complaints from family and friends, not to mention teachers.
So the gentleman added on and said academic performance was adversely affected. And then the tutor replied and said, obviously there were complaints from family and friends. That's more of like supplementing. Remember, we are looking for symptoms. Symptoms are like signs, of course, which cannot be touched. So let's go ahead. Probably the other student might answer. Yes, you have to pay attention to how the conversation is flowing as you're making notes, because reading the options at the same time, remember they are paraphrased, you might find hard time. And by the way, guys, don't forget to check out my video of improving your reading speed. It will definitely help you with listening.
Yes, of course. Another symptom was, as you would expect, a preoccupation with instant messaging. They would be annoyed if interrupted when chatting online, and they would feel depressed and moody when they couldn't. They would go without sleep in order to chat, and when they were offline, they would still be thinking about online chatting.
So this lady started off by saying, yes, of course, another symptom was, which is a good discourse marker. Pay attention to these discourse markers. They will help you find the answer. She said that the teenagers were preoccupied with instant messaging and they would get annoyed if interrupted. And of course, they get depressed and go without sleep. And of course, they would definitely think of other things. So please try to, make these notes, because there's a lot of paraphrasing and the video or the audio is really moving so fast. Yes, so we shall have definitely look through the options later on.
As in chemical addiction, they would need to increase the dose, in this case of IM time, to get satisfaction. That sounds quite disturbing.
So the lady said that they would increase dose of IM time with regard to chemical addiction, which is kind of irrelevant. So just keep that, and of course you note it down, but don't pay close attention to it. It was more of an addition to the point that she mentioned earlier. So let's move on. Probably the man will later on speak, or even the tutor. Let's keep listening to these changing voices. Yeah.
Yes, and as you can imagine, loss of relationships due to overuse of IM was a factor too. The addicted teenagers would rather chat online than go out with friends or spend time with family, which jeopardized their social relationships and their educational opportunities.
So remember, we are continuing to make notes on the side here. The gentleman said loss of relationship due to IM use. This is instant messaging use, and also they would rather chat online. So let's just keep these notes, and remember, we are looking for symptoms. We are looking for symptoms which correlate with the options that we are given, and we are supposed to choose 3. Let's go ahead.
The fourth addictive factor we found was escape. These teenagers used IM as a form of escape from reality and responsibilities.
Wow, very well. We really had that right. She did say the fourth symptom was escape from responsibilities and reality. So they use this instant messaging as a form of escape from reality and responsibility. Here we have D as break free from confinement or control. Very, very, very good synonym. From confinement, which is reality, and responsibility, which is control. So yes, let's get moving.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation,
Alright guys, we are now done. Now let's imagine the whole paper is done and we have the other 10 minutes, and definitely we have already answered all the other questions of section 1, section 2 and section 4, and we are only left with these MCQs. So it's time to really pick out the correct answers. Here we had which 2 scopes of the research. If we can really look through our notes, we had when James said that then the other kinds of symptoms, so that means we shall have B. And then like I mentioned earlier, the lady talked about IM addiction prediction. So here we have B and E. And remember, they were starting to confuse us because they said relationship between academic performance and IM addiction, and yet here we have relationship between schoolwork and symptoms. So you see how they are trying to confuse you, and then when you look at option C, we have symptoms that can be predicted, yet they were talking about that IM can be predicted. So definitely here we have B and E, which is types of symptoms, and then IM addiction prediction. Someone might have answered A, but remember, IM addiction's presence was just a formal research. It wasn't their research. It was just a formal research. So moving on to question 23 to 25. Here we had symptoms correctly describe IM addiction. If we really look through these notes, we definitely had the last one, which was break free from confinement or control. And then we also had think of other things. Yes, they were thinking of other things if you will follow through the video. And also we had that there was loss of control. That was actually the first symptom which James talked about, loss of control. So here it was paraphrased as E, unable to control themselves. Yes, so here we have C, D, and E. If you look through what to control everything, it wasn't there. Have lots of circle friends. No, they actually said that it would break the relationship. So that's like an atonym. So it wasn't even there. We also had fear of the dark. Fear of dark wasn't even mentioned anywhere. So that's it. Alright guys, you could try out this one and comment your answers.
1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2.
You are going to hear a talk given to Chinese students on going to study in England. First, look at questions 11 to 16. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 11 to 16.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Smethers from International Students Consulting. And welcome to today's talk on what you need to know and think about prior to going to study in the UK. Probably the biggest question is that of housing. It can be very expensive, especially in London. And the halls of residence in most universities are certainly not cheap. That's what you pay for convenience. Probably the best thing for most of you, I believe it's the first time any of you have studied in the UK, is to try to find a vacancy in a coop house with other students. If you are keen to make maximum progress with your English, I would suggest that you try to find accommodation with at least one native speaker. So many foreign students end up living only with people from their own country, and I've actually known cases where their English is worse after 3 years than when they arrived. One advantage of living with British students is that they'll probably have experience of dealing with landlords, looking after the bills, and other things that might be done quite differently in your home country. So how to find shared housing? Any housing? Arrive early. It's best to try and be in the town or city where you'll be studying at least a week before the start of term. If you leave it too late, you'll be competing with thousands of other students all looking for a place to live. And one of your first stops should be the housing office. They have a database of all types of off-campus accommodation, and the early bird catches the worm, as they say. You'll probably meet other students at there in the same boat you are. And chat with people. If you meet any that seem to be the type of people you could get along with, then you might well sort out your accommodation quite quickly with them.
Now look at questions 17 to 20.